She slid the divorce papers across the kitchen table, like she was returning a library book she'd already forgotten about. No tears, no trembling hands, no last look that said maybe I'm making a mistake. Just the flat sound of paper on wood. And then her eyes, calm, decided, already somewhere else, lifting to meet mine with the kind of patience you use on someone you've already moved past in your mind. That was the moment I understood. She hadn't just decided to leave. She had been gone for a long time. I was simply the last one to find out. My name is Marcus Webb, and 18 months ago, I was the kind of man who believed that being a good husband was enough. That showing up every day, working hard, loving someone quietly and consistently, and that those things meant something. That they added up to something permanent. I was wrong, and the education that corrected me cost more than I can put into simple numbers. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to the kitchen, to the papers on the table, to the morning that split my life, into a before and an after, so cleanly it felt almost surgical. It was a Wednesday. I remember because I had a 7 a.m. call with a client. I'd been chasing for 3 months, and I was already running the conversation in my head while I poured coffee, already rehearsing the pitch, already thinking about work the way I always did, and first, instinctively before anything else. That was part of the problem, she would later tell people, that I was always thinking about something other than her. People would nod when she said it. It sounds reasonable framed that way. It sounds like a woman who wasn't being seen. What they didn't know, what she never mentioned in those conversations, was that I was thinking about work because we were 4 months behind on the second mortgage, because her boutique business had lost $40,000 in 18 months, and I had quietly absorbed every dollar of it without a single argument because I had taken on 2 extra consulting contracts at night so that she could keep the shop open, so that she could have the things she said she needed. But that part never made it into the story she told. She sat down across from me, folded her hands on the table, and said very calmly that she wanted a divorce. I put down my coffee cup. I asked her if she was serious. She said she'd never been more serious about anything. I looked at the papers. I looked at her face. I looked for something, a crack, a flicker. The small tell that would indicate this was fear talking, or exhaustion, or the kind of dramatic declaration that burns, bright for an hour and then fades when the emotion passes. I had seen that version of her before. I knew how to wait it out. But this wasn't that. I could see it in the stillness of her, in the way her hands were folded without gripping, in the way she was breathing, slow, regular, like someone who had already done the hardest part and was now simply waiting for the administrative process to catch up. She had planned this. The papers were already filled out, already signed on her end, already organized with little colored tabs marking the places where I needed to put my name. She had sat with a lawyer. She had gone through the language, the assets, the terms. She had done all of it without a single conversation, without a single warning, without one moment in which she looked at me and said something is wrong. Something needs to change. I am thinking about leaving. Nothing. Just the papers on the table and the folded hands and those decided eyes. Who is he? I asked. It came out quieter than I intended. I hadn't planned to ask it. It just arrived. The way certain truths do. Not because you've reasoned your way to them, but because some part of you has known for a while and is simply tired of pretending otherwise. She didn't answer immediately. That was its own kind of answer. That's not what this is about, she said. Okay, I said, and I picked up my coffee again. I don't know why. Some reflex of normalcy. The cup was cold. What followed was 30 minutes of the most surreal conversation of my life. A calm, almost business-like discussion of who would get what, conducted at the kitchen table of the home we had shared for 6 years, with the morning light coming through the window the same way it always did, and the neighbor's dog barking twice at nothing the same way it always did, and the world outside moving in its ordinary way while inside that kitchen. Something was being disassembled with the quiet efficiency of people who've decided not to make a scene. She wanted the house. She had already spoken to a lawyer about the equity split. She was keeping the car, the newer one, the one I had helped her pick out 2 years ago. She was keeping the furniture in the living room and the bedroom. She said I was welcome to my clothes, my books, my home office equipment, and the old Honda that burned oil and needed new brake pads. I listened to all of it. I didn't interrupt. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't do any of the things that might have felt good for 30 seconds and then made everything worse. I sat there with my cold coffee and I listened and I thought, somewhere beneath the shock, that I needed to understand the full shape of what was happening before I responded to any piece of it. When she finished, I asked her how long she'd been planning this. "A while," she said. "Months?" She looked at the table. "Marcus," which meant yes, which meant longer than months probably, which meant that the last year of our marriage, the late nights, I'd chalked up to her stress about the business. The weekends she'd spent with friends I barely knew. The gradual cooling that I had told myself was just a season, just a phase, just the normal weather of a long relationship. All of it had been something else entirely. All of it had been the slow, deliberate process of a woman, building an exit while her husband stood in the same house and kept paying the bills and believed, genuinely believed, that they were going through something they would eventually come through together. I signed the papers 3 days later, not because I didn't have grounds to fight. Not because my lawyer, a tired man named Gerald who smelled like cigarettes and was surprisingly sharp, didn't outline the ways I could contest the asset division, the ways the numbers didn't add up in her favor. I signed because I looked at everything she wanted and I made a decision that felt, in that moment, like defeat, but that I would come to understand very differently 6 months later. I decided I would let her have it. All of it. The house, the furniture, the good car, every physical object that tied me to the life we'd built. I would sign my name and walk out of that house and I would start with nothing. And I would see what I could build when there was nothing left to protect. But she wasn't finished with the humiliation. The papers weren't enough. On the Saturday after I signed, I came back to the house to collect my things. I had arranged it with her, a 2-hour window, civil, organized. I brought 2 large duffel bags and 3 boxes. I had made a list. I was going to be in and out. What I had not accounted for was the audience. Her sister was there. Her best friend, Dominique. A woman I had met once at some event whose name I couldn't place. And a man, tall, easy in the way, expensive confidence makes people easy, standing in my living room with his hand resting on the back of the couch I had picked out, looking at me with an expression that was almost sympathetic. Almost. She introduced him. She actually introduced him. Standing in the living room of the house I had paid the mortgage on for 6 years, she introduced the man she had apparently been seeing for God knows how long, and she did it with the calm composure of someone who had decided that the most efficient way to end something was to remove all ambiguity at once. His name was Preston. Of course it was. I looked at him. I looked at her. I looked at the small group of women arranged around the room like witnesses, like a panel convened to observe the conclusion of something. I felt the heat come up in my face and I made a decision, the same kind of decision I would keep making over the next 6 months, in different forms, every time the world offered me a reason to collapse. I did not give them the scene. I nodded at him. I said quietly that it was nice to meet him. I picked up my bags, loaded my 3 boxes, and I walked out of that house without looking back. Not because I wasn't destroyed, not because I didn't feel, with every step down that driveway, like something essential was tearing loose inside me, but because I understood in some cold and clarifying way that the only power I had left in that moment was the power to deny them the satisfaction. I sat in the oil-burning Honda in the driveway for a moment, just one moment. Then I started the engine and I drove away. And somewhere behind me, in the house that used to be mine, someone said something and then they laughed. I heard it through the open window. I don't know who. I don't know what was funny. I kept driving. I drove until the neighborhood disappeared in the rearview mirror, until the streets became unfamiliar, until I was just a man in a car with 2 bags and 3 boxes and $4,200 in his bank account and absolutely nothing behind him that he was required to protect anymore. It was the worst day of my life. It was also, though I had no way of knowing it yet, the first day of everything that came after. And what came after was something not one of them. Not Vanessa, not Preston, not Dominique, with her witness eyes, could have imagined standing in that living room on that Saturday morning. Something was already moving, quiet and unseen, Beneath the surface of the wreckage she thought she'd left behind. She just didn't know it yet. I found a room on Craigslist for $650 a month. That's not a metaphor. That's not the setup for some story about how humble beginnings build character. That's just what it was, and a room, singular, in a house shared by 3 other men I barely spoke to, with a bathroom down the hall and a window that looked directly at a brick wall, and a radiator that made a sound at 3 in the morning like someone slowly dragging furniture across a concrete floor. That was where Marcus Webb landed. That was the bottom of the drop. I set my boxes against the wall. I put my 2 duffel bags in the corner. I sat on the edge of the bed, a mattress on a low frame, clean at least, firm in the way that cheap mattresses are firm. And I looked at the 4 walls of that room, and I did the thing I had been refusing to do since the kitchen table and the divorce papers, and the Saturday morning with Preston standing in my living room. I let myself feel it, not the anger. The anger was easy. The anger was almost comfortable. It had shape and direction, something to push against. What I let myself feel was the thing underneath the anger, the thing the anger was standing on top of and trying to cover, the grief, the specific, humiliating grief of a man who had given a decade of himself to something, not just the marriage, but the idea of the marriage, the belief that love was a thing you could build into permanence. If you were consistent enough and patient enough and showed up enough, and discovered that the thing he'd been building had no foundation he'd ever been permitted to see. I sat on that mattress in that $650 room, and I felt it for exactly 1 hour. I gave myself that 1 hour to be completely destroyed, to let the full weight of it land without trying to manage or minimize or redirect. 1 hour to be a man who had lost everything and knew it. I looked at the brick wall outside, the window, and I breathed through it, and I let it be as bad as it actually was. Then the hour ended, and I opened my laptop. Here's the thing about me that Vanessa never fully understood, that Preston never knew, that none of the people in that living room that Saturday had any way of seeing because I had never needed to show it. I am very good at building things, not physical things, not furniture or houses or anything you can hold. I am good at building systems, at looking at a complicated problem and finding the architecture inside it, the hidden structure that, once you see it, makes the whole thing navigable. It's what I do as a consultant. It's what I had done for 11 years, quietly and without much ceremony, for companies that paid me well enough but never extraordinarily. I was good at it. I had always been good at it. I had just never pointed it entirely at myself, until now. I opened a blank document and I started writing. Not a journal, not a letter to Vanessa, not any of the therapeutic exercises my friend Damon would later suggest. I wrote a plan. Specific, structured, with timelines and metrics and clear sequential steps. I wrote it the way I would write a recovery strategy for a client whose business had just taken a catastrophic loss, which is exactly what this was if you stripped away the emotion and looked at the bones of it. I had lost my primary residence, my primary asset, a significant portion of my financial stability, and my most important personal relationship simultaneously. Treated as a business problem, it was serious but not unsurvivable. I had skills. I had contacts. I had 11 years of documented results. I had, if I was careful and strategic and willing to work at a level I had never quite pushed myself to before, a real path forward. I worked until 2 in the morning. The radiator made its furniture dragging sound and I didn't hear it. The first week in that room was the hardest. Not because of the room itself. I have never been precious about physical comfort, which is one of the things Vanessa had occasionally criticized me for, though she seemed less concerned about it when I was absorbing the losses from her boutique. It was hard because of the silence, because I had lived with another person for 6 years, and before that had always had the ambient noise of a shared life. A roommate, a girlfriend, a family home, and now there was nothing. Just the radiator and the brick wall and my own breathing. I used the silence. I reached out to every serious professional contact I had, and I told them simply that I was restructuring and available for new engagements. I didn't explain. I didn't perform. I sent clean, direct messages, and I followed up exactly once on each, and I waited. Within 10 days, I had 2 new consulting inquiries. Within 3 weeks, I had converted both into contracts, not enormous, but real. enough to stabilize. But I wasn't thinking about stable. Stable was where I'd been. Stable was the 6 years of good enough that had ended on a Wednesday morning with papers, on a kitchen table. I wasn't rebuilding towards stable. I was building towards something else, something I hadn't fully named yet but could feel in the way. You feel weather changing. Pressure shift. A new quality in the air. I started waking up at 5. I know how that sounds. I know it sounds like the kind of thing people put in motivational content. The kind of detail that gets rolled out as evidence of transformation. But it wasn't symbolic. It was purely practical. I had a full consulting day ahead of me, and I needed hours that belonged to nothing else. Hours that were mine before the day made its demands. And 5 a.m. was where I found them. I would make coffee on the small machine I'd bought at a thrift store for $4. And I would sit at the small desk in the corner of that room, and I would work on the other thing, the thing that was not consulting. 3 years earlier, I had developed a logistics optimization framework for a mid-sized distribution company. I had been hired as a consultant, had done the work, had handed over the deliverable, and had moved on to the next engagement the way you do when you're working for other people's visions. But I had always known, in the way you know things you don't let yourself say out loud, that the framework I'd built was worth considerably more than the fee I'd been paid for it. It was elegant. It was scalable. It solved a specific expensive problem that existed in dozens of industries. I had filed a provisional patent on the core. Methodology 18 months before the divorce, quietly, without mentioning it to Vanessa. Not because I was hiding it, but because it had felt too early to talk about, too uncertain, too much like hope to risk saying aloud. Now, alone in a room with a brick wall and a malfunctioning radiator and absolutely nothing left to lose, I started developing it seriously. I want you to understand what that period actually looked like, because it looked nothing like the version of this story you might be imagining. It was not cinematic. There was no training montage. No sequence of triumphant mornings and meaningful progress. It was grinding and slow and full of false starts. It was spending a Saturday rebuilding a section of code I'd written the previous Tuesday because I'd found a structural flaw. It was reaching out to a software developer named Kwame, a man I'd worked with briefly on a project 4 years earlier, and asking if he'd be willing to consult on a rev share basis because I couldn't pay him properly yet. It was Kwame saying yes. And it was understanding exactly how much that single yes mattered. It was eating the same 3 meals on rotation because decision. Fatigue is real, and I needed every unit of mental energy for the work. It was Damon calling me every Sunday evening to check in, to make sure I was still standing. And me giving him the same answer every time, I'm fine. I'm working, I'm okay, which was partly true. The grief came in waves the way they tell you it does. It would recede for days at a time, long enough for me to start believing I had processed it. And then something would land it back on me with full force and without warning. A song, a particular quality of afternoon light, the smell of a specific coffee blend she had always ordered. I moved through those moments the way you move through heavy weather, head down. Keep walking, don't stop. The other side exists even if you can't see it. What I did not do was contact her. I want to be precise about that because it matters. I did not call. I did not text. I did not drive past the house. Did not find reasons to be in that neighborhood. Did not reach out through mutual friends to check on how she was doing, or whether she was happy, or whether Preston was still in the picture, or any of the things that a part of me, the tired, grieving part that still lived in the kitchen of that house on Wednesday mornings, wanted badly to know. I went silent. Completely, deliberately, absolutely silent. Because I understood something important. The only way to build what I was building was to stop spending energy on what I'd lost and redirect every unit of it forward. She had made her choice. She had made it carefully and deliberately and ahead of schedule, and she was living inside it now, and that was her life. Mine was the room with the brick wall and the 5 a.m. alarm and the framework that I was beginning, slowly and then faster, to believe might actually be something real. By month 2, Kwame and I had a working prototype. By month 3, I had shown it to 2 people in my network whose judgment I trusted absolutely, and both of them had used almost exactly the same word, remarkable. By month 4, someone else heard about it through channels I hadn't tracked and reached out to me directly. A name I recognized. A name that, if I wrote it here, you would also recognize. He wanted a meeting. I remember sitting in my room after that email arrived, reading it twice to make sure I had understood it correctly, and then setting the laptop on the desk and looking at the brick wall outside the window for a long moment. Something had shifted. I couldn't see the full shape of it yet, couldn't see where it was going or how large it might become. But it was there, undeniable, a current underneath everything, moving in a direction I had chosen, picking up velocity in the dark. The meeting was scheduled for month 5. I bought one new suit. A single one fitted correctly, nothing extravagant. I sat across the table from a man whose company operated in 37 states, and I presented the framework the way I had rehearsed it, cleanly, without overselling, letting the architecture speak. Because the architecture was genuinely good, and I had learned by then that the best work doesn't need decoration, it needs clarity. He asked 3 questions, sharp ones, the kind that tell you immediately you are dealing with someone who actually understands what they're looking at. I answered each one without hesitation. At the end of the meeting, he leaned back in his chair and looked at me, for a moment in the way that certain people look at things they are deciding whether to acquire. Then he named a number. I kept my face still. I had practiced this too, not just the presentation, but the moment after. The moment when the number arrives and every instinct you have wants to react to it. I kept my face still and I asked for a week to review the terms with my attorney. He smiled. He said that was very reasonable. I drove back to the $650 room in the oil-burning. Honda and I sat on the edge of the mattress and I thought about Vanessa sliding those papers across the kitchen table, like she was returning something she'd finished with. I thought about Preston's hand on the back of my couch. I thought about the laughter through the open window as I drove away. And then I thought about something else, something that had been forming quietly in the back of my mind for weeks, taking shape without my quite deciding to let it. A thought about what happens next, about what 6 months of silence and work and rebuilding in the dark eventually produces when the time comes to stop being invisible. A thought about what she would see when she finally saw me again. I hadn't planned for it to happen the way it did. But there are moments when the world, which has been indifferent to your suffering and your work and your silent, grinding reconstruction, suddenly decides to arrange things with a precision that feels almost intentional. 6 months after she slid those papers across the table, the world arranged things. And I was ready. The deal closed on a Thursday. Not with fanfare. Not with a room full of people applauding. Or a bottle of champagne someone had been keeping cold for the occasion. It closed the way real things close, with signatures on documents, a wire confirmation number sent to my attorney, and a phone call from Gerald that lasted 4 minutes and ended with him saying, in his cigarette and coffee voice, that I should go get a decent meal because I'd earned it. I sat in my car outside Gerald's office building and looked at the confirmation number on my phone for a long time. The street outside was doing its ordinary thing. A delivery truck double-parked, 2 women talking outside a coffee shop, a kid on a bicycle weaving through the midday foot traffic. With the confidence of someone who has never been seriously hurt yet, all of it looked different from inside the car. Brighter somehow, more detailed, like a filter had been lifted, off the world, and I was seeing its actual colors for the first time in 6 months. The figure attached to that confirmation number was not abstract wealth. It was not lottery ticket money, not the kind of number that arrives without context and means nothing because you haven't built the container to hold it. It was specific and earned, and I knew every single hour of work that had gone into producing it, every 5 a.m. morning and every rebuilt section of code and every moment I had chosen to keep moving forward. When the grief and the exhaustion and the sheer improbability of what I was attempting had pressed down on me like something physical, like weather you have to walk through rather than wait out. I knew the cost of every dollar in that number. That's what made it real. That's what made it mine in a way that nothing in the life before had ever quite felt mine. I called Kwame first. He picked up on the second ring, and when I told him the number, he went completely silent for 10 full seconds, which was not like Kwame at all. Kwame was a man of immediate and confident responses. A man who always had the next sentence ready before you'd finished your last one. The silence was its own kind of reaction. Then he laughed. A real laugh, full and sudden and completely unguarded. The kind that doesn't have anything performative in it. The kind that arrives before the person can decide how they want to sound. I laughed too. We stayed on the phone for 20 minutes after that, talking about nothing in particular. His sister's new apartment, a documentary he'd been meaning to watch, whether a specific neighborhood barbecue spot was worth the drive, which was exactly the right conversation to have. Not the numbers, not the next steps, not the strategy, just two people who had built something real, talking the way people talk when the pressure finally releases. Then I went and got a decent meal, the way Gerald told me to. I chose a restaurant I had walked past many times over the last 6 months without going, in the kind of place with cloth napkins and a menu that doesn't show prices. On the version they hand you, which had always struck me as a particular kind of theater, but which I now found, sitting inside it for the first time, was actually just a place that took food seriously and assumed its guests did too. I ordered without looking at the right side of the menu. I ate slowly. The food was genuinely excellent. The kind of cooking that makes you pay attention to it, that doesn't allow you to eat absently. I ate and I thought, and the thinking was different from the thinking of the last 6 months. Less urgent, less driven by the specific gravity of a deadline or a problem that needed solving. More like the thinking you do when you finally have enough room to look at the whole picture instead of just the piece directly in front of you. I thought about Vanessa. I want to be precise about this because it would be easy to get it wrong. I thought about her not with anger, and not with the complicated longing that had colored everything in the first 2 months, after the divorce, and not with the cold, strategic distance I had maintained through months 3 and 4 when I needed every unit of emotional energy directed at the work. I thought about her with something that was closer to clarity than anything else. The clarity that comes when you have traveled far enough from something to finally see its actual shape. She had made a calculated decision with the information she had. She had looked at our marriage, at the mounting financial pressure, at the distance that had grown between us, at the version of me that existed inside that house during those years, and she had concluded that leaving was the right move. She had been wrong about what she was leaving. She had seen the surface and mistaken it for the depth, had seen the tired man with the stretched budget and the too big jacket, and had not seen, could not have seen, the architecture underneath. That wasn't malice. It was a failure of vision, a significant one, with real consequences, but a human one, a mistake. Understanding that didn't erase what it had cost me, but it changed the weight of it. It made it a thing that had happened rather than a thing that was still happening, which is a distinction that matters more than it sounds. What I was sitting with, at the cloth napkin table in the restaurant that took food seriously, was a different question. A forward-facing one, about what came next in a personal sense, about the version of my life that existed on the other side of the work, the version that included warmth and shared time in the particular texture of a life built with someone, rather than constructed alone in a $650 room with a brick wall outside the window. Her name was Simone. I had met her 6 weeks earlier, in the most mundane way imaginable, a shared elevator in the building where I had rented a small office for the final push on the deal. She was on the 4th floor. I was on the 7th. We had ridden up together 3 times before either of us said anything, beyond the nodded acknowledgement that urban elevator culture permits and nothing more. On the 4th occasion, she had been carrying a stack of folders that was visibly, structurally, 2 folders beyond what the stack could responsibly support, and when the elevator made its small lurch between floors, the top 2 folders departed from the stack, and I caught them, and she laughed. Not the polite, managed laugh of someone being gracious about a minor, awkward moment. A real laugh, surprised out of her, unplanned, with no calculation in it. I liked it immediately and completely. We had coffee once, standing in the building lobby with paper cups because neither of us had time to sit. She was direct without being abrupt, curious without performing it, and when she asked about my work, she asked specific questions that told me she had actually processed what I'd said rather than waiting for her turn to speak. She was an architect. Not residential, she was quick to clarify. with the gentle emphasis of someone who has made this distinction many times. She designed public spaces, parks, plazas, the shared areas of cities that belong to everyone, and that most people walk through every day without thinking about who, decided what they would look like, what they would feel like, what they would invite people to do. We had lunch the following week at a place she chose with the casual confidence of someone who eats well and knows exactly what she is doing, and then coffee again, and then a long walk after work one evening that neither of us had planned, that simply continued because neither of us suggested stopping. By the time the deal went into its final phase and the number arrived and the Thursday closed, the way Thursdays sometimes do, with a ow, confirmation, and a decent meal, and a call to Kwame. I had seen her 5 times in 6 weeks and was aware, without having said so, that the awareness of her had become a regular feature of my interior landscape. I texted her from the restaurant, told her the deal had closed. She responded in under a minute with something warm and specific and exactly the right length, a quality I had come to notice and value in her. The precision of her communication, the way she never used more words than the moment required or fewer than it deserved. She asked if I wanted to celebrate properly. Not that evening. She had something she couldn't move. The following Saturday, she knew a place. I said yes without hesitation, what I had no way of knowing. Sitting in that restaurant, with the good food and the cloth, napkins and Simone's, text on my screen and the confirmation, number still glowing somewhere in my phone's recent messages, was what Saturday would turn out to be. That the city, which presents itself as enormous and anonymous but is actually a network of overlapping small worlds that intersect more often than probability seems to allow, would arrange itself with the particular precision it occasionally manages, that the place Simone knew would be the same place Vanessa had chosen for that same evening, that 6 months of parallel lives would find, on a Saturday in October, the same coordinates. I didn't know any of that on Thursday. Saturday arrived with the particular hard blue sky that October produces in this part of the country, cold and clear and committed to itself. Simone was already outside when I pulled up. She was wearing a coat the color of dark wine, her hair down, and she looked at the car, the new one. Not the Honda, not the oil burner that had carried me through the worst of the last 6 months. For just a moment before she looked at me, not in a calculating way, more the way you look at someone when you notice something has shifted in them, when the change is in how they carry themselves rather than in anything you could point to directly. She said I looked good. She said it the way she said most things, directly, without decoration, as a simple statement of what she observed. "You seem lighter," she said as I pulled into traffic. "The deal," I said. "That's not just the deal," she said. She was right. "But some things arrive in their own time, and I let that one arrive in its own time." She directed me east, toward the part of the city that had been carefully reimagined over the past few years. New restaurants alongside restored buildings, public art that had been installed with actual intention, streetscapes that work the way good streetscapes work, which is to say, invisibly, making people feel comfortable without knowing exactly why. Simone pointed things out as we drove. A plaza she admired, a lighting installation that she had opinions about, a pedestrian intervention that had, in her assessment, solved the wrong problem in an interesting way. I listened and watched the city through her eyes and thought that this was one of the better ways to experience a place you think you already know. We parked and walked half a block to the restaurant. It was the kind of place that had earned its reputation slowly, through the simple mechanism of being consistently excellent, without marketing or buzz or any of the accelerants that sometimes substitute for actual quality. There was a small crowd outside, people waiting with the patient good humor of people who know the wait will be worth it. And that is when I saw the car, her car, black with the small dent in, the rear passenger panel from the parking structure, 18 months ago that she had always meant to get fixed. I knew that car the way you know the objects of a shared life, not by thinking about them, but by a recognition that bypasses thought entirely and arrives already complete. I stopped walking. Simone noticed. She turned and looked at me, then at the car, then back at me with the calm attentiveness that was one of her most consistent qualities. She waited. She did not ask. She understood, in the way perceptive people understand things, that the information would arrive when I was ready to offer it. "Someone I know," I said. She nodded, and we went inside. The restaurant was warm in the way that good restaurants are warm. Not just temperature, but atmosphere. The amber lighting and the low sound of many separate conversations combining into something that felt inhabited and alive. The host was leading us to a table when I heard Vanessa's laugh. I would have known it in a room of 1,000 people. 6 years of shared life gives you that, a complete internal catalog of a person's sounds, their rhythms, their particular frequencies. I heard it, and I knew, before I looked, exactly where she was. I let the host seat us. I let Simone settle across from me. I let the server fill our water glasses and walk us through the evening specials. I was present for all of it, genuinely present. And when my gaze finally moved across the room, it moved without urgency, without the desperate quality that 6 months ago would have been unavoidable. Vanessa was at a table near the window, Preston beside her. 2 others I didn't recognize. She was mid-story, gesturing with the particular animation she used in social settings, performing the version of herself she liked to present in company, polished, assured, the version that had always known how to work a room. Then she looked up and saw me. The moment lasted less than a second, but contained, in that fraction, something I recognized as shock that she hadn't been able to prevent. Her eyes found mine with the specific quality of eyes that have encountered something they were not prepared for. And then, because I was not alone, her gaze moved to Simone, to the coat the color of dark wine, to the ease of her posture, to the way she was leaning forward, slightly and saying something. That was making me smile. Vanessa's story stopped. Preston noticed, and looked over, and his face did. Something controlled and careful that told me he understood immediately what the situation contained. Someone at the table said something, probably asking why she had stopped. And I did not watch how she answered because I had already returned my attention to Simone, and to the menu she was holding toward me with a suggested recommendation, and to the dinner that was about to happen. The dinner was excellent. Simone was excellent in it. She told me about a commission she had been approached about, a significant one, a public space in a city she had always wanted to work in, and the careful excitement in her voice, as she described it, was one of the better things I had heard in recent memory. I listened and asked questions, and the table by the window receded to the peripheral awareness it deserved, which was small. We were finishing the main course when I heard the footsteps. I knew before I looked the specific cadence of them. 6 years. She stopped at the edge of our table. "Marcus," she said. I looked up. Her composure was intact but working. I could see the effort of it in the particular stillness of her face, the way a face looks when it is being held together, rather than simply resting in its natural expression. "Vanessa," I said. Her gaze moved to Simone. Simone looked back at her with the calm of a woman who understands a situation completely and has decided simply to let it be. Whatever it is, not hostile, not performing graciousness, just present and steady and entirely herself. "You look well," Vanessa said. To me, her voice was even, almost perfectly. "Thank you," I said. "You too." She opened her mouth, closed it. Something moved through her, expression that she hadn't entirely planned, something genuine and unscheduled, that surfaced briefly before the composure sealed back over it. "It was good to see you," she said. "Take care of yourself," I said. She nodded once and walked back across the room, and sat down, and I watched Preston lean toward her and say something quiet, and watched her shake her head in response. And then I turned back to Simone, who was watching me with those steady, perceptive eyes. "You okay?" she asked. I checked the actual answer before I gave it. "Yeah," I said. "I really am." Dessert arrived. It was very good. Simone talked about the commission, and I listened in the evening, finished the way good evenings finish, slowly, without wanting to end, with the particular satisfaction of time that has been well spent in good company. The table by the window and everything at it continued to recede until it occupied exactly the amount of space it deserved in my awareness, which was very small, which was exactly right. The Monday after the restaurant, she called. I was in my new apartment, real windows, real light, real peace. 6 months earlier, I had stared at a brick wall. Now I had sky. Good coffee, work that mattered, a life that felt intentional. Her name lit up my phone. Once that would have shaken me. Once it would have meant everything. Now it didn't. I let it ring. She called again. I let that one go too. Then she texted, "I think we should talk. There are things I should have said." I read it. Put my phone down. Went back to work. Not out of pride. Not out of revenge. But because I genuinely had nothing left to say. I had already had every version of that conversation, alone. In the early mornings, in silence, in pain, I had already processed everything she was just beginning to understand. I wasn't living in the past anymore. I was building forward. That evening, Damon called. "The boutique closed," he said. I stayed quiet. "Preston's gone too. So the life she chose collapsed. 6 months ago, that news would have felt like justice, like balance, like something being corrected. But now, it didn't feel like anything. Just distant, like hearing about damage to a house you no longer live in. She had made her choices, and I had moved on from them. Are you okay?" Damon asked. "Yeah," I said. And for the first time, it was fully true. No hidden pain, no weight behind the word. Just, okay. I called her the next morning, not because I needed closure, but because I wanted to be decent. She answered instantly. "You seem different," she said. "At the restaurant." "I am," I replied. 6 months changes a man. She admitted it then, quietly, honestly. "I made assumptions. About you. About what you were capable of. I think I was wrong." I sat with that. This was the moment most people imagine as victory. The apology. The realization. But I didn't feel victorious. "Just clear. You made the best decision you could with what you knew," I told her. It hurt. "But I don't think you're a villain. I think we stopped being honest with each other." Silence. "I didn't expect you to say that," she whispered. "I know." She asked about Simone. "She seems good for you." "She is," I said simply. And then I told her the truth. I'm happy, really happy, not to prove anything, not to hurt her, just because it was true. When the call ended, I didn't sit there thinking about her. I went back to work, because my life didn't revolve around that chapter anymore. 3 weeks later, Simone and I drove to the coast. No luxury, no performance, just a quiet place by the water. We walked along the beach as the sun dropped low, turning the ocean gold. She talked about her work, excited, alive. I talked about mine, the future, the growth. No desperation, no proving anything, just two people building something real. Then she stopped. "You know what I noticed about you?" She said, "You don't perform. You're just there." I thought about the 6 months before that moment. The mornings at 5 a.m., the cheap meals, the endless work, the silence, the rebuilding. "I had a good teacher," I said. "Who?" "Myself." And that was the truth. Because everything I had now came from the man I became in that room with the brick wall. Not from revenge, not from proving her wrong, but from discipline, consistency, refusing to stop. For a long time, I thought the man I used to be was the problem. Too patient, too giving, too quiet. But I was wrong. Those weren't weaknesses. Those were the exact qualities that built everything I now had. The marriage failed. Not me. She didn't leave a weak man. She left a man whose strength hadn't been revealed yet. And by the time it no longer belonged to her. At the restaurant, she didn't freeze because of money, or success, or status. She froze because she saw something simpler, something final. A man who had moved on. Completely. The story doesn't end with revenge. It ends on a beach. With peace. With someone real. With a version of myself I had to lose everything to find. She threw me out. And I'm grateful. Not for the pain. Not for the humiliation. But for the moment that forced me to become who I actually was. Because 6 months earlier, a man sat on the edge of a cheap mattress, gave himself 1 hour to break, then opened his laptop, and kept going. He knew something I didn't. He knew it wasn't over. He was right.